My breath came in ragged gasps as I stepped into the parking lot. The night shift had just ended, but the thought of going home filled me with a dread so thick I could barely swallow. My stepmother, Veronica, would definitely be drunk by now. Probably with some new boyfriend she'd picked up at whatever dive bar she'd stumbled into tonight. And I knew exactly what would happen if I walked through that door. She'd take out all her rage on me, just like she always did. The bruises from last week still ached across my shoulders and down my back, purple and yellow reminders that hadn't even begun to fade. I couldn't take another beating. Not tonight. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice it at first, that scent cutting through the cool night air. Alpha pheromones, sharp, deep, and absolutely dangerous. My omega instincts kicked into overdrive immediately, sending warning signals screaming through my nervous system. No, not here. Not now. My heat cycle was about to start. I could feel it building under my skin like a fever waiting to break. And if any alpha caught my scent while I was like this, vulnerable and alone in a deserted parking lot, I was as good as dead. Or worse. Heavy footsteps echoed behind me. Confident, purposeful, getting closer. My heart slammed against my ribcage so hard I thought it might crack right through. I spun around frantically, searching for an escape route any way out of this situation. But there was nothing, just rows of empty cars and darkness pressing in from all sides. Then I saw it. A black SUV, sleek and expensive looking, parked about 20 feet away. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, like someone had forgotten to close it all the way. Without thinking, without even considering the consequences, I bolted toward it. My sneakers slapped against the pavement as I ran, threw open the back door and dove inside, pressing myself down onto the floor behind the front seats. My entire body trembled violently. That scent was even stronger in here, surrounding me completely. Cedarwood and something darker, something that made my omega instincts go haywire with a confusing mix of fear and attraction. This SUV belonged to that alpha. I just trapped myself in a predator's den. No, I whispered frantically, trying to control my breathing, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. Suddenly the driver's door swung open. Heavy boots hit the interior floor with solid thuds. The door slammed shut. The engine roared to life. My heart was pounding so violently I was certain he could hear it. Certain he knew exactly where I was hiding. Then I heard him inhale. Once. Twice. Deliberately pulling air through his nose, searching for the foreign scent that had invaded his space. The car stopped moving before it had even started. Who the hell is in my car? His voice was low, commanding, and sent electricity shooting straight down my spine. This wasn't a question, it was a demand. I squeezed my eyes shut, childishly hoping that if I couldn't see him, maybe he couldn't see me. Maybe he'd just drive away and forget about the strange Omega cowering on his floor. I can smell you, Omega. His voice was closer now, right above me. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard him shift in his seat, turning around to look into the back. When I finally forced my eyes open, I found myself staring up into the most intense gray eyes I had ever seen. They were like storm clouds, cold, calculating, and completely unreadable. But his pheromones were anything but controlled. They pressed down on me with crushing weight, possessive and threatening all at once. You've got 10 seconds to explain before I throw you out, he growled, and every instinct I had told me he absolutely meant it. My voice came out broken and terrified. Please. I just need to hide. Just for a little while. Please don't make me leave. His gray eyes locked onto mine. Piercing blue meeting hardened steel. 1 second passed. Then another. The tension was suffocating. I waited for him to grab me by the collar and haul me out onto the asphalts. But instead, he turned back around, settled into the driver's seat, restarted the engine, and pulled out of the parking space without another word. One wrong move and you're dead, he said, his tone flat and cold. But he was driving. He hadn't kicked me out. I slowly pulled myself up onto the back seat, my legs shaking too badly to support me properly. What had I just done? I jumped into a stranger's car, an alpha's car, during preheat. This was possibly the stupidest decision I'd ever made in my entire life. And considering the long list of bad choices that had led me to this moment, that was really saying something. The SUV's interior was pristine, all black leather, and that expensive new car smell mixed with his overwhelming scent. It was too quiet, Just the low hum of the engine and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I couldn't see much of him from this angle. Just the back of his head and his broad shoulders filling out a dark jacket. His hands gripped the steering wheel with controlled strength, and I noticed his knuckles were scarred, the kind of scars you got from fighting, from hitting things, or people. Minutes crawled by in suffocating silence. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know what he was planning to do with me. All I knew was that every cell in my body was acutely aware of his presence, of the power radiating off him in waves. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, still not looking at me. I swallowed hard. "Oh, Walker." "Walker," he repeated it, like he was testing how it sounded. There was a pause then. "What were you running from?" How could I possibly explain that my stepmother was a violent alcoholic who'd made my life hell ever since my father died, that I was an orphaned omega with no family, no support, just trying to survive one day at a time in a world that saw me as nothing but prey? "None of your business," I managed, trying to sound braver than I felt. He let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it, just dry, bitter amusement. "You're in my car. That makes it my business." Then his eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror, catching mine in the reflection. The directness of that gaze made my face burn hot. "You're in preheat," he stated matter-of-factly. Shame flooded through me, turning my face an even deeper shade of red. He could smell it on me. Of course he could. Every alpha within a mile radius could probably sense it. "I'll get out," I said quickly. "Just drop me anywhere. I'll figure something out." "No." That single word hit me like a physical blow. "What?" The SUV suddenly veered to the side of the road and stopped. He turned around in his seat, facing me fully for the first time. His features were sharp and handsome in a dangerous way. Strong jaw, straight nose, and those piercing gray eyes that seemed to see right through every defense I tried to put up. "You're not going back to wherever you came from. Not like this." He shrugged off his jacket and tossed it to me. "Wear this. It'll help mask your scent." I stared at the jacket in my lap, completely confused. Was this kindness? Or was it some kind of "Why are you helping me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. He held my gaze for a long moment before answering. "Because if I let you go right now, some other alpha will find you within an hour. And I don't share what's mine." "What's mine?" Those words echoed in my head, making my heart race for entirely different reasons. "My name's Cade," he said, turning back around and pulling smoothly back onto the road. "And you just became my responsibility, Walker. Whether you like it or not." I couldn't find any words to respond. I just sat there, clutching his jacket, breathing in his scent, and trying to process what was happening as the city lights began to disappear behind us. I'd pulled myself together enough to sit properly in the back seat, but my heart still hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The SUV was eerily quiet inside. Just the gentle purr of the engine and the occasional sound of other cars passing on the highway. But that silence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, heavy with unspoken tension and questions I was too afraid to ask. Where was he taking me? What did he want? And why hadn't he just left me in that parking lot like any sensible person would have? I watched the back of his head as he drove, noting the way his jaw was set in a hard line, the tension visible even from behind. His hands maintained that same controlled grip on the steering wheel, like he was restraining himself from something. The alpha energy rolling off him was suffocating, dominant and powerful in a way that made me feel impossibly small. I'd put on his jacket like he'd told me to, and while his scent did help calm my frayed nerves slightly, it also made me hyper-aware of every breath I took, every movement he made. The highway gave way to darker roads, less traveled. Trees started appearing on either side, their shadows stretching across the asphalt in the headlights. We were leaving the city behind completely. "Where are we going?" I finally found the courage to ask. "Somewhere safe," was his only response. Safe for who? I wanted to ask, but I bit my tongue. I'd already pushed my luck far enough tonight. More minutes passed. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. I could feel questions building up in my throat, threatening to spill out, but every time I opened my mouth to speak, fear locked the words away. Cade shifted in his seat, adjusting the rearview mirror slightly. Our eyes met in the reflection, his gray to my blue, and I quickly looked away, heat creeping up my neck. "You're scared of me," he observed. It wasn't a question. I'd be stupid not to be, I replied honestly. Smart, he said. Fear keeps you alive in this world. There was something dark in the way he said that. Something that spoke of experience with violence and danger. I hugged his jacket tighter around myself, trying to disappear into the leather seats. The SUV slowed as we approached what looked like the middle of nowhere. Dense forest on both sides, no streetlights, no houses, just darkness and trees. Then suddenly massive iron gates appeared in the headlights, 15 feet tall, with security cameras mounted on top. Quie pressed a button on his visor and the gates began to swing open with a low mechanical groan. My stomach dropped. What kind of person lived behind gates like that? We drove through and up a long, winding driveway. The mansion that came into view made my breath catch for entirely different reasons. It was huge, all modern architecture and dark stone, with warm lights glowing from a few windows. But despite the lights, it looked cold. Unwelcoming, like a fortress designed to keep the world out rather than a home meant to welcome people in. Quie parked near the front entrance and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "Come on," he said, already stepping out of the car. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle. This felt like a point of no return. Once I stepped out of this car and went into that house, everything would change. But what choice did I have? Going back to Veronica wasn't an option. Sleeping on the streets during preheat was a death sentence. I opened the door and stepped out onto the smooth pavements. The night air was crisp and clean, so different from the city smog I was used to. Quie was already walking toward the front door, apparently confident I would follow. And I did, because what else could I do? The interior matched the exterior, expensive, modern, and completely devoid of any personal touches. Marble floors reflected the dim lighting from minimalist fixtures. The furniture looked like it had been chosen by an interior designer and never actually used. Everything was perfectly placed, perfectly clean, perfectly empty. "Is anyone else here?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the vast space. "Just us," Quie replied, shrugging off his coat and hanging it on a hook by the door. He turned to face me fully, and I got my first real look at him in proper lighting. He was tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with a powerful build that his clothes couldn't quite hide. His dark hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. And those gray eyes, they studied me with an intensity that made me want to run and stay frozen in place all at once. "Hungry?" he asked. I realized I was starving. I hadn't eaten since before my shift, which felt like a lifetime ago now. "Yeah. Actual kitchen's this way." I followed him through an archway into a massive kitchen with granite countertops and top-of-the-line appliances that looked barely used. He opened the refrigerator and started pulling out containers. "I don't cook much," he said almost apologetically, "but there's leftover Chinese food if you want it." "That's fine," I said, still standing awkwardly near the entrance, unsure if I was allowed to sit down or touch anything. He noticed my hesitation. "Sit. You're not a guest, Walker. You're staying here, which means you can actually use the furniture." I pulled out one of the bar stools and perched on it nervously while he heated up the food. The microwave hummed, filling the silence. I watched him move around the kitchen with efficient, practiced movements. Despite his size and the obvious strength in his frame, he wasn't clumsy. Everything he did was controlled, measured. "How long am I staying here?" I asked quietly. He pulled the container from the microwave, grabbed a fork and set it in front of me. "As long as it takes, as long as what takes, for you to be safe." He leaned against the counter across from me, arms crossed. "I meant what I said in the car. You can't go back to wherever you came from. Not until we figure this out." "Figure what out?" I was getting frustrated with his vague answers. "Who you're running from. Why you're so scared. What we need to do to make sure you don't end up dead in a ditch somewhere." His bluntness shocked me, but there was no cruelty in his tone. Just brutal honesty. I picked at the fried rice, my appetite suddenly gone despite the hunger gnawing at my stomach. "And what do you get out of this? Nobody helps someone for nothing." Quie was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes never leaving my face. Maybe I'm tired of watching people get hurt when I could have prevented it. There was pain in those words, old and deep. I wanted to ask what he meant, who he'd failed to protect, but something in his expression told me that conversation was off limits. At least for now. "There's a guest room upstairs," he said, changing the subject. "Second door on the right. Bathrooms attached." Door locks from the inside. I suggest you use it. You're not going to. I trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. His expression hardened. I'm not going to touch you, Walker. Not without your permission. Never without your permission. The intensity in his voice left no room for doubt. I know what you're thinking, what you're afraid of. But I'm not that kind of alpha. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But trust wasn't something that came easily to me anymore. I finished eating in silence. Then Cade showed me to the guest room. It was bigger than my entire bedroom at Veronica's house. King-sized bed with soft-looking sheets, a dresser, a desk, and large windows with heavy curtains. The attached bathroom was equally impressive. All marble and chrome. Get some rest, Cade said from the doorway. We'll talk more tomorrow. Cade? I called out before he could leave. He turned back, eyebrows raised slightly. Thank you. For not leaving me there. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something softer. Don't thank me yet, Walker. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into. And with that ominous statement, he left. Pulling the door closed behind him, I locked it immediately, then leaned against it, my legs finally giving out. I slid down to the floor, hugging my knees to my chest. What had I done? I'd traded one dangerous situation for another. But at least here, in this cold, empty mansion, I had a locked door and a bed. At least here, nobody had hit me yet. I eventually pulled myself up and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, too exhausted to care about changing. As I lay there in the darkness, I could still smell Cade's scent clinging to the jacket I was still wearing. Cedar wood and smoke and something uniquely him. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the absolute insanity of this entire situation, I felt safer than I had in years. Sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains woke me the next morning. For a moment I forgot where I was and panic seized my chest. Then the memories came flooding back. The parking lot, the SUV, Cade, this mansion. I sat up slowly, my body aching from sleeping in my clothes, and took in my surroundings with fresh eyes. The room was even more impressive in daylight. All clean lines and expensive expensings. It felt like a hotel room, beautiful but impersonal. I used the bathroom, marveling at the water pressure in the massive shower, then ventured downstairs. The house was silent, and I half expected it to be empty. But as I descended the stairs, I caught the scent of fresh coffee. Someone was awake. I found Cade in the kitchen, dressed in dark jeans and a fitted black shirt that showed off his muscular build. He was reading something on his phone, a mug of coffee in his other hand. He looked up when I entered, those gray eyes assessing me quickly. Morning, he said. Coffee's fresh. Mugs are in the cabinet above the machine. I poured myself a cup, grateful for something to do with my hands. The silence between us felt different in daylight. Less threatening but still charged with uncertainty. Did you sleep? He asked, eventually. I took a sip of coffee. It was strong and black, exactly what I needed. Where did you sleep? My room's downstairs, opposite end of the house. He set his phone down. I figured you'd feel safer if there was distance. He was right, but I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I asked, what happens now? Now you tell me what you're really running from. The truth this time. I gripped my mug tighter, the warmth seeping into my palms. I told you, my stepmother is a piece of work, I'm sure, he interrupted. But there's more to it. I can tell. I hated how perceptive he was. She's violent. When she drinks, which is every night, she takes it out on me. Has been for 3 years. Ever since my father died. No other family? None that want me. The words tasted bitter. I'm an omega, which made me worthless to most of them. And the ones who did show interest. I shuddered, remembering the way some of my father's brothers had looked at me. Let's just say Veronica was the lesser evil. Cade's jaw tightened. Did she know about your heat cycles? She didn't care. Said it was my problem to deal with. I set my mug down, my hands shaking slightly. Last month, she tried to sell me to one of her boyfriend's friends. An alpha who wanted an omega he could control completely. I managed to get away that time, but I knew she'd try again. So you ran. So I ran, I confirmed. Straight into your car, apparently. He was quiet for a moment, processing everything I'd told him. Then he asked, do you have any idea if she's looking for you? Probably. Not because she cares, but because I'm technically her property until I turn 21. She gets a monthly stipend from my father's estate as long as she's my guardian. When's your birthday? 6 months from now, Cade swore under his breath. 6 months is a long time, Walker. I know. I wrapped my arms around myself. I was planning to just disappear, maybe head to another state, find work under the table somewhere, during heat cycles. Alone? His voice sharpened. That's suicide. I didn't have a better plan. The words came out harsher than I intended. I don't have money, connections or options. I was just trying to survive. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. Cade stood up, walked to the window and stared out at the forest surrounding his property. The morning light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the hard angles of his features. You'll stay here, he finally said. Until your birthday, until we figure out a permanent solution. Whatever it takes, you'll stay here where it's safe. Why? I needed to understand. Why would you do that for a complete stranger? He turned to face me and something vulnerable flickered across his expression before he locked it down. I had a younger brother, Omega, like you. He got involved with the wrong people, trusted the wrong alpha. I was too late to help him. His voice dropped. I won't be too late again. The weight of that confession settled over the kitchen like a heavy blanket. I didn't know what to say. Sorry seemed inadequate, but I understood now. This wasn't just about me. This was about a debt he felt he owed, a failure he was trying to make right. I'm not your brother, I said softly. I know that. He moved back to the table, leaning against it. But maybe I can keep you from becoming another regret. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor shifted, shoulders straightening, expression hardening into something cold and professional. I have to handle some business today, he said, all traces of vulnerability gone. You'll stay in the house. Don't answer the door. Don't go outside. There's food in the fridge and pantry. Make yourself at home. What kind of business? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The kind you're better off not knowing about. He grabbed his phone and a set of keys from the counter. I'll be back before dark. If anything happens, if anyone shows up, there's a panic button in your room behind the nightstand. Press it and help will come immediately. That definitely didn't make me feel safer. What kind of help? But he was already heading for the door. Just stay inside, Walker. I'll explain everything when I get back. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in this massive silent house with 1,000 questions and 0 answers. I spent the first hour exploring, trying to get my bearings. The mansion had multiple levels, countless rooms, and enough space for 10 families. But it felt empty, like nobody really lived here. I found Cade's office locked, a gym in the basement, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves but hardly any books. Everything was pristine and unused. Around noon I heard vehicles approaching. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran to the upstairs window and peeked through the curtains. 2 black cars pulled up to the house, and several men in dark suits got out. They didn't look like friendly visitors. I remembered Cade's warning about staying inside, about not answering the door. So I retreated to my room, locked the door and tried to calm my racing heart. I could hear voices downstairs, muffled but intense. The conversation went on for maybe 20 minutes before I heard the cars leave again. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking about Cade's words. The kind you're better off not knowing about. What exactly did he do for a living? This house, the security, the way those men had shown up like it was routine. None of it pointed to anything legal. When the sun started setting and he still wasn't back, anxiety began gnawing at my stomach. What if something had happened to him? What if those men had come back? What if Veronica had somehow tracked me here? I was spiraling into worst-case scenarios when I finally heard the SUV's engine in the driveway. Relief flooded through me, immediately followed by confusion about why I was relieved. I barely knew this man, but somehow, in less than 24 hours, he'd become my only anchor in a world that had never felt safe. I heard the front door open and close, heard his footsteps moving through the house. Then they stopped outside my room. Walker? His voice was tired. Can I come in? I unlocked the door and opened it. He looked exhausted, his shirt slightly disheveled, a fresh cut above his eyebrow that definitely hadn't been there this morning. You're hurt, I said before I could stop myself. He touched the cut absently. It's nothing. Just a disagreement that got physical. A disagreement about what? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. About you, actually. Word travels fast in certain circles. People know I brought an omega home. They have questions. My stomach dropped. What kind of people? The kind I work with. The kind who don't trust easily. He leaned against the doorframe. I need to tell you something, Walker. Something that might make you want to run again. I swallowed hard. Tell me. I'm not just some businessman with a nice house, he began, choosing his words carefully. I run operations that exist outside the law. Territory, protection, deals that happen in shadows. Some people call it organized crime. I call it survival in a world that doesn't play by rules anyway. A mafia boss. He was a mafia boss. And I was living in his house. So those men today, I trailed off. Associates. They wanted to meet you, verify that you're real, make sure you're not some kind of trap. He watched my reaction carefully. I told them you're under my protection. That means something in my world. It means nobody touches you without going through me first. And if I want to leave, I had to ask, even though I had nowhere to go. Then you leave. I won't stop you. His gray eyes held mine. But I'll be honest, out there, with your stepmother looking for you and your heat starting. You won't last a week. In here, under my roof, you're untouchable. Your choice. It wasn't really a choice at all. We both knew it. I'll stay, I whispered. At least until I figure something else out. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. Good. Because despite what my world looks like, Walker, I meant what I said. You're safe here. I'll make sure of it. The morning sun filtered through expensive curtains, pulling me from a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. For the first few seconds, I thought maybe everything had been some bizarre nightmare, the parking lot, the SUV, Cade, all of it. But when I opened my eyes and saw the luxurious bedroom surrounding me, reality crashed back down. I was really here, in a mafia boss's mansion, hiding from my stepmother while my body prepared for a heat cycle that could start any moment. I dragged myself out of bed, my muscles still tense from yesterday's stress, and made my way downstairs. The house was so quiet I expected to find it completely empty. But when I reached the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. The counter was set with a full breakfast spread, scrambled eggs, buttered toast, fresh fruit, orange juice, and a pot of coffee that was still steaming. Everything was arranged carefully, like someone had actually put thought into it. Was this for me? Or had Cade simply made extra before leaving? I approached the food cautiously, half expecting it to be some kind of test. But my stomach growled loudly, reminding me that I'd barely eaten yesterday. The eggs were still warm when I touched the plate. Whoever made this had done it recently. I sat down and ate slowly, savoring each bite. It had been so long since anyone had prepared food for me without expecting something in return. The simple act of kindness felt foreign, almost suspicious. After finishing breakfast, I explored the downstairs area more thoroughly than I had last night. The living room was immaculate. Cream-colored sofas that looked like they'd never been sat on. Abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than a year's rent, and a fireplace so clean I doubted it had ever been used. Everything screamed money and power, but nothing suggested that an actual person lived here. There were no photographs, no personal items, no books left lying around. It was like living in a museum. I tried to distract myself by watching television, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept circling back to what Cade had told me last night. He ran operations outside the law. Organized crime. I was living under the protection of someone who existed in the shadows, someone dangerous enough to need panic buttons and iron gates. The afternoon dragged on endlessly. I found myself jumping at every small sound, convinced that Veronica had somehow tracked me down or that the police were about to raid the place. By the time evening approached, my nerves were completely shot. That's when I heard the cars. Multiple engines rumbled up the driveway, and my heart immediately jumped into overdrive. I rushed to the front window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. Two sleek black sedans parked near the entrance, and four men climbed out, all wearing dark suits, all moving with the kind of controlled precision that screamed danger. These weren't businessmen. These were predators. I watched Cade step out onto the porch to greet them. Even from a distance, I could see the shift in his demeanor. The man who'd been almost gentle with me last night was gone, replaced by someone mold and authoritative. He shook hands with each man, then gestured them inside. I should have gone back upstairs. I should have locked myself in the guest room like he told me to do. But curiosity and fear warred inside me, and curiosity won. I crept down the hallway until I could hear their voices coming from what I assumed was his office. The shipment arrives Friday morning. A gravelly voice said, "South Dock, 3 a.m. We need extra security on this one." "Already arranged," Cade replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Martinez is handling the details." "What about the weapons?" another man asked. "Secured. Everything's in place." My stomach twisted into knots. Shipments, weapons, security. This wasn't some abstract concept anymore. I was hearing actual criminal activity being planned just rooms away from where I stood. "And what's this I hear about an Omega?" A third voice cut in, smooth and vaguely threatening. "Word's spreading that you've taken someone in. People are curious." There was a pause that felt like it lasted forever. "That's my business," Cade said flatly. "Not up for discussion." "Come on, boss. You know how it looks. An Omega shows up out of nowhere. You bring them to your private residence. People talk. They wonder if you're getting soft. Let them wonder." His voice had dropped to something dangerously quiet. "Anyone who has a problem with my decisions can take it up with me directly. We clear?" "Crystal," the smooth voice responded, though I detected an undercurrent of amusement. The conversation shifted to other topics. Territories, payments, someone named Victor, who was apparently causing problems. I'd heard enough. More than enough. I backed away from the hallway and practically ran up the stairs, my heart hammering so hard I felt lightheaded. I locked myself in the guest room and sat on the bed, trying to process everything. This was real. All of it was horrifyingly real. I wasn't just staying with some wealthy businessman who had a dark past. I was living with someone actively involved in illegal operations, someone whose associates questioned his decisions and whose enemies probably wanted him dead. An hour later, I heard the cars leave. The house fell silent again. Oppressively so. I waited, wondering if Cade would come upstairs, wondering what I would say if he did. His footsteps eventually stopped outside my door. "Walker." His voice was tired, stripped of the authority it had held earlier. "Open the door, please." I didn't move. My hands were shaking. "I know you were listening," he continued. "I could smell you in the hallway, and I know what you're thinking right now." "Do you?" I called back, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "You're scared. You're wondering what kind of person you've ended up with. You're thinking about running." He was right on all counts. "But you're also thinking about where you'd go," he said quietly. "And you're realizing you don't have anywhere else. Am I wrong?" I hated that he was right. I hated that I was trapped by circumstances, by biology, by the cruel reality that the devil I knew was somehow safer than the world outside these walls. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Right now, I just want you to trust that despite what you heard, despite what I am, you're safe here. Nobody in my organization will touch you. Nobody outside of it will get close enough to try." "How can you guarantee that?" "Because I don't make promises I can't keep, Walker. And I promise you on everything I have, that as long as you're under this roof, nothing will hurt you." The conviction in his voice should have reassured me. Instead, it terrified me, because that kind of certainty came from someone who was used to controlling everything around him, someone who eliminated threats without hesitation. I heard him sigh when I didn't respond. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow when you're ready." His footsteps retreated down the hallway, and I was alone again with my spiraling thoughts. But as the night deepened and exhaustion finally pulled at my consciousness, a new sensation crept through my body. Heat. Not the emotional kind, the biological kind. My skin felt too tight, my temperature was rising, and a deep, aching emptiness settled in my core. My heat was starting, and I was trapped in a house with an alpha who'd already claimed I was his. The heat came on fast and brutal, like being thrown into a furnace. One moment I was lying in bed trying to sleep, and the next my entire body was on fire, every nerve ending screaming for relief I couldn't provide. I kicked off the blankets, then pulled them back on when chills racked through me despite the burning. Nothing helped. Nothing made it better. Sweat soaked through my shirt within minutes. My breathing turned shallow and rapid. The emptiness inside me grew into a yawning chasm that demanded to be filled. and my omega instincts knew exactly what I needed even as my rational mind recoiled from the thought. An alpha. I needed an alpha's presence, their scent, their touch. I buried my face in the pillow, trying to muffle the pathetic whimpers escaping my throat. This was humiliating. I was supposed to be stronger than this, more in control. But heat didn't care about pride or control. It stripped away everything until only raw need remained. Hours crawled by, or maybe it was minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. Time lost all meaning when every second felt like an eternity of discomfort. I was dimly aware that I should probably drink water or eat something, but the thought of moving made my muscles ache in protest. Then I caught it. That scent. Cedar wood and smoke, distinctly masculine, distinctly alpha, distinctly Quie. He was right outside my door. Walker. His voice penetrated through the haze of heat. I can smell what's happening. I'm coming in. Don't try to fight me on this. I wanted to tell him to stay away, to leave me alone, but all that came out was a broken sound somewhere between a whimper and a plea. The door opened and suddenly he was there, filling the room with his presence and that overwhelming scent that both calmed and excited my frantic omega instincts. He approached the bed slowly, like I was a spooked animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. When he got close enough, I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He was fighting his own instincts, his alpha nature that was probably screaming at him to respond to an omega in heat. This is going to get worse before it gets better, he said, his voice strained. How long do your heats usually last? 3 days, I managed to gasp out between shaky breaths. Sometimes 4, he swore under his breath. Have you ever gone through one alone? I nodded, not trusting my voice. That's dangerous, Walker. Especially for an unmated omega. The fever can get high enough to cause seizures or worse. Didn't have a choice, I whispered. Something in his expression shifted, anger, but not directed at me. He was angry for me at the circumstances that had forced me to endure this alone repeatedly. He sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain some distance even though my instincts were screaming at me to close that gap. I'm going to help you get through this, he stated firmly. But I need you to understand something first. I will not take advantage of this situation. I won't bond with you without your explicit consent given when you're in your right mind. What I will do is provide what your body needs to survive this safely. My scent, my presence. That's all. Understood? I stared at him, trying to process his words through the fog in my brain. He was offering to help me through heat without expecting anything in return. That went against everything I'd ever been taught about alphas, especially ones involved in criminal enterprises. Why would you do that? The question came out barely audible, because leaving you to suffer alone isn't an option I'm willing to consider. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted, and pressed his palm against my forehead. His hand was blissfully cool against my burning skin. You're running a dangerous fever. I'm going to get you some water and fever reducers, then we're going to manage this properly. He left briefly and returned with supplies, water bottles, medication, cool washcloths, and several of his shirts. The shirts confused me until he explained. My scent on these will help calm your omega instincts. It's not as effective as direct contact, but it's safer for both of us right now. I took the medication he offered and drank half a bottle of water under his watchful gaze. Then he handed me one of his shirts and I immediately pressed it to my face, inhaling deeply. The relief was instant and overwhelming. My racing heart slowed slightly, and the desperate edge of panic receded just enough for me to think more clearly. Better? He asked. I nodded, unable to articulate how much better. The emptiness was still there. The heat still burned through my veins, but it was bearable now instead of completely overwhelming. Cade settled into the chair beside the bed, clearly intending to stay. I'll be right here. If you need anything, more water, another shirt, whatever, just tell me. As the night wore on, he kept his word. He stayed in that chair, refreshing the cool cloths when they got warm, making sure I stayed hydrated, talking to me in a low, steady voice when the fever made me delirious and frightened. He never touched me beyond what was medically necessary. He never made demands or suggestions. He just stayed. Somewhere in the darkest part of the night, when the heat peaked and I was sobbing from the intensity of it, he moved from the chair to sit on the floor beside the bed, close enough that I could reach out and touch him if I needed the reassurance, far enough that there was no pressure. I've got you, he murmured. You're going to make it through this. I promise. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the absolute insanity of trusting a man I barely knew, I believed him. When I finally fell into an exhausted sleep near dawn, the last thing I remember was the sound of his steady breathing and the comforting weight of his presence keeping the darkness at bay. 3 days. That's how long the heat lasted. And Cade stayed with me through every agonizing hour. By the time it finally broke, I was emotionally and physically drained, but alive. More than alive, I was cared for in a way I'd never experienced before. The morning I woke up clear-headed for the first time, Cade was asleep in the chair, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, dark circles under his eyes. He'd barely slept. I realized. He stayed awake most of the time, monitoring my condition, making sure I didn't get worse. I sat up slowly, my body aching but functional. The movement must have woken him because his eyes opened immediately, alert despite his obvious exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Better. Tired, but better." I glanced down at my hands. "Thank you for everything. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "And before you start feeling indebted or obligated, don't. This isn't about keeping score." But it was in a way. He'd seen me at my most vulnerable, my most desperate, and he hadn't taken advantage. That meant something. It changed the dynamic between us in ways I was only beginning to understand. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Cade would leave for business during the day, though he never told me details and I stopped asking, and return in the evenings. We'd eat dinner together, usually in comfortable silence. Sometimes he'd work in his office while I read or watch television. It was almost domestic. If you ignored the armed guards who occasionally patrolled the grounds and the tense phone calls he'd take in hushed tones. Damon, his right-hand man, appeared on the 3rd day after my heat ended. He was tall, built like a fighter, with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. But he was respectful, keeping his distance while still managing to convey that he was there for security purposes. "Boss wants to make sure you have everything you need," Damon explained when I asked why he was there. "And that nobody unexpected shows up while he's handling business." "What kind of business?" I asked, though I expected the same non-answer I always got. Damon just smiled slightly. "The kind that keeps roofs over heads and food on tables. That's all you need to know." A week after my heat, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. After dinner, instead of retreating to my room like usual, I followed Cade to his office. He'd left the door slightly ajar, which I took as implicit permission to enter. He looked up from whatever he was reading on his computer, surprise flickering across his features. "Something wrong?" "I need to know what happens next," I said, crossing my arms to keep my hands from shaking. "I can't just exist here indefinitely without understanding what this is." Cade leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "What do you want it to be?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know. I just know I can't keep pretending everything is normal when I'm essentially a prisoner who—" "You're not a prisoner," he cut in sharply. "I told you before, if you want to leave, you can leave. And go where, Cade?" Frustration bled into my voice. "You said my stepmother put a bounty on me, that your enemies might target me. So what exactly are my options?" He stood up, moving around the desk to lean against it, arms crossed. The posture mirrored mine, and I might have found it funny if I wasn't so frustrated. "The bounty is real. $50,000 for information leading to your location. Veronica's apparently told people you stole from her jewelry, cash, things that would make bounty hunters interested beyond just the money." His expression darkened. "And yes, my rivals would love to use you against me if they knew you were here." My stomach dropped. "So I really am trapped?" "No." He pushed off the desk and stepped closer. "You're protected." "There's a difference." "Is there?" I challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, the result is the same. I'm stuck here, dependent on you, with no control over my own life." His jaw tightened. "You want control? Fine. Here are your options laid out clearly. 1. You stay here under my protection until we find a way to neutralize the threats against you. 2. I can arrange for you to relocate to a different state with a new identity, though that comes with its own risks. 3. You take your chances out there and hope you're smart enough and lucky enough to survive." The bluntness of his words stung, but I appreciated the honesty. "And what do you get out of option 1? I asked quietly. Nobody protects someone out of pure altruism, especially not in your world. Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability breaking through his usual controlled facade. I get to not fail someone again. I get to prove that maybe I'm not completely beyond redemption. And if I'm being honest, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, I get to keep someone I'm starting to care about safe. My breath caught. You barely know me. I know you're stronger than you think. I know you put yourself in danger to escape a worse situation. I know you didn't let heat break you even when you were terrified. He took another step closer, and I know that somewhere in the past week, keeping you safe stopped being just about easing my conscience and became something I genuinely want. The air between us felt charged, heavy with implications neither of us was quite ready to voice. I'm not asking you to bond with me, he continued. I'm not even asking you to trust me completely. I'm just asking you to stay until we figure out a solution that doesn't end with you hurt or worse. I wanted to argue, to push back against the presumption that I needed saving. But he was right about the reality of my situation. Pride wouldn't keep me alive out there. Okay, I finally said. I'll stay, but I need to contribute somehow. I can't just be dead weight. A small smile tugged at his lips. Deal. We'll figure something out. As I left his office that night, something had fundamentally shifted between us. The pretense was gone, replaced by honest understanding. I was choosing to stay, and he was choosing to protect me. Whatever came next, at least we'd face it with clear eyes.